Thank you so much, Wendy. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Big shout out to AIA Florida for putting this on. Always a great event, live and in webinars. Oop. So, yeah, just want to thank them real quick. Quick introduction on me. My name is Royal Casey. I work for PacClad, also known as Peterson Aluminum Corporation. Started out in this industry January 2002. Worked for a metal roofing contractor that specialized in metal. That's all we did was metal, no tile, no shingles, no flat roofing. So that's really all I know. But in 2002, started out as pretty much a laborer. Worked my way up kind of through the company to a lead man, to a foreman. Ran the sheet metal shop for a little while, came in and project managed, and kind of ended my 10.5 years there with doing all the estimating for the company the last few years. A little bit of a natural progression for me. I got on the manufacturing side of things. Started with another manufacturer than this for about 3.5 years, and I've been here at Peterson for a little over 9 years now. So I don't know, do the math, 22, 23 years in the industry. I tell you all this because I really just want to be your metal go-to person. When you have questions about metal, roofing, walls, soffit, anything metal on the exterior of the building, feel free to reach out. Doesn't always have to be about my product, as I've worked on the contractor side and worked with every major manufacturer out there. So let's get into this. We are going to be talking about design essentials for architectural metal wall, roof, and wall systems. Obviously, your AIA credits, AIA Florida will be taking care of all this for you. Really doesn't, they've already got all that set up. So if you have any needs or problems there, please reach out to them. This is a copyrighted presentation. They are available through AIA Florida, or I can always send them to you directly. Just remember to use them accordingly. And then, if you have questions, I'm sure you already know this, but go ahead and type them in the Q&A section. And I'm gonna get through this presentation first, and then try to go through the questions and answers at the end. If we don't finish with all of them, I'm sure AIA Florida will do like they've done in the past, and we'll gather all those questions and get those answered at a later date. So, course description, as you can see here, architectural metal wall and roof panel systems lend themselves to particularly unlimited applications in almost any climate or environment. Residential, institutional, commercial, retail, recreational, industrial, hospitality, multifamily. It's really gaining a lot of popularity and really being used in all different facets. We're really going to be talking about the design options, right, with metal roof and architectural wall panels and different applications. I really like this presentation because there's a lot of pictures, a lot of examples for you guys, a lot of case studies for you guys to look at and see how and when you can use these different systems. So the learning objectives is kind of what I just talked about, examining and figuring out when to use what profiles and where and how to use those. And how to enhance the building envelope by using the different colors and the different profiles. And then again, like I said, a lot of case studies for you guys to look at and see the different things that we can do with metal these days. A lot of advancements in the last probably 10 years with metal, with the colors, different profiles, yada yada. So jumping right into it here. We'd like to start with the different paint systems that are out there. We get some misconceptions here of what to use and where to use it, how to use it. But some of your typical finishes for metal roof products include silicone modified polyester, also known as SMP. This presentation, we talk a little bit about the stone coated and granule finishes that we can use. And then the pinovinylidene fluoride, or also known as PVDF, or a trade name there is Kynar. So let's talk about some of those, starting with SMPs, or silicone modified polyesters, composed of silicone additives and a base resin of polyester. Silicone supplements the paint's performance by improving gloss retention and weather resistance. So the polyesters, the SMPs, great paints. If you really think about what paint is doing, its first thing is to kind of protect the base material, which SMPs do very well. They last a very long time. The kind of pros and cons to everything, right? The con to SMP is the fade rate. It fades much quicker than say your Kynars. So again, doing its job by protecting the base material, but especially in those vibrant colors like the blues, the reds, the greens, it is going to fade much quicker than some of the other paint options. So just something to think about there. You really see these kind of in the metal building industry, a kind of a cost-effective way if you're not really worried too much about fade rate. Like I talked about earlier, stone-coated, granule-coated panels, formed and shaped to style. So these are your metal systems that are made to look like tile or even shingles, right? It's a stamped metal process instead of a roll formed process. So you stamp the shingle or the tile, and then what we're doing is we're coating it with a granule coating, kind of like shingles, right? So that granule coating is what is helping protect the base material. It also has a clear coat sealer that's applied over the top for extra protection. We see this a lot on the residential side of things, where maybe you have an HOA that doesn't like the look of standing seam or maybe an exposed fastener type panel. So these are a great alternative to still get the longevity and the strength out of metal, but have it look like, to the layman anyways, look like a shingle or a tile. So switching gears in the PVDF, as I said earlier, trade name is Kynar. It offers superior durability and versatility. Originally developed for the use in abrasive environments, right? It's really a kind of a super resin, right? All paints have resin that goes into the paint to help protect it. Think about when you go to Lowe's or Home Depot, you pick up a gallon of paint. You bring it to the guy at the desk, and it's white, right? And then he's adding the pigments to it. He's also adding resins to it. So Kynar or PVDF really is the resin that goes into it that helps protect not only the paint itself, but helps protect the pigments within the paint. That's where you get the resistance to fading or chalking or weathering. It can be provided on both steel and aluminum, roofs and walls. My opinion, if you're going to be painting, using a paint system on metal on the exterior of the building, especially a roof, right? A lot of exposure on that roof, you need to be using PVDFs or Kynar type paints. Kind of going back to the SMPs, I've seen people use them, on the soffit areas, right? Not as much exposure there to the UV rays on the soffit, and typically soffit is white, right? What happens to paint when it fades out? It kind of goes back to its original form and original white color. It gets chalky, this and that. So Kynar is, again, kind of the top of the line paint finish for exterior products. It's actually kind of a fun fact. Kynar resins are in a lot of things these days. They're in a lot of your hard plastics. We have car parts, engine parts for our cars these days that are made out of plastics because they add the Kynar paint to them. There's or not the Kynar paint, but the Kynar resin. A few years ago, we actually had a shortage on Kynar because all the lithium batteries were using it to coat their batteries to help protect their batteries. So it's just kind of a super resin that's put into a lot of things. In this case, we're using it in the paints to really help protect the pigments. So moving on, 20 years ago when I started in this industry, this paint color chart on the right-hand side, was probably, a dozen to 24 colors. Most manufacturers out there now are, up to 30, 40 standard colors. So when I say a standard color, that means it's made, it's on the floor, it's readily available, right? We can do all kinds of different colors, matching different colors, this and that, but that is not a stocked item just ready to go, right? We would have to send the metal out to get it painted in a custom color, which takes time and quantity, right? I can't just paint a very small amount. So kind of cool. You can see down there at the bottom some weathered copper, some weathered steel. Right, trying to get that look of copper or even a weathered steel look to it, without using real copper. Right, we all know that copper is very expensive. Um, so great alternative here. We can also, with these paints, and I really have to kind of give the credit to the paint manufacturers, right? We're just applying their paint to our metal, and then roll forming it into different products. But they've done a great job in the last, decade, with the technology behind it, right? Putting ceramic flakes into the paint to help with reflectivity and also emissivity, right? That's probably even a little bit more important, right? That heat that doesn't get directly reflected, that heat that kind of stays around. Emissivity helps, right? These paint systems are actually helping push that heat away from the building instead of letting it absorb into the building. But really, the cool part is the aesthetics, right? Many more colors out there to choose from, on the standard level, and then of course we have tons of custom colors to choose from as well. What you don't see on here, and we'll touch on a little bit later, is the different wood grain looks that we're getting these days. Again, got to give it to the paint guys and gals to be able to do that kind of stuff and still use the Kynar resins. Even the natural metal, the ore finishes is what we call it. So pretty cool technology. So on the residential side of things, right, especially here in Florida, becoming very popular, mainly probably because of the strength of it, right? We have these storms that come through and rip off all the tile and flat roofing and all that kind of stuff, and you'll see a lot of the metal actually stays. It's one of the strongest types of roofing material and wall panel material out there. There are obviously, it's also, one of the most expensive systems out there. So when I'm talking to a building owner, whether it be residential or commercial, I really focus on the lifetime value, right? You're going to have some upfront costs, but really it's about the longevity, right? We're trying to make roofs last 50, 60, 70 years, right? You never get that out of your tiles and your shingles. So that's where the lifetime, it actually catches up. The upfront cost, but once you have to replace a shingle roof or a tile roof, right, now you're in the negative, and metal is getting into the positive. So try not to focus too much on that upfront cost, but more on the life cycle cost of metal. It's also very maintenance free, right? And not a lot you have to do to it to keep the performance up. There's a couple case studies. I like this first one here. So the gray or silver that you're seeing there on the wall panels, that is actually a standing seam metal roof panel. The owner or the architect wanted that vertical line look to it. So they actually used it on a wall. Just because it's labeled a roof panel, right, doesn't mean it can't be used on a wall. Now, that doesn't work the other way, right? So if it's labeled a wall panel, typically cannot be used on a roof, mainly because of how the water interacts with it on the roof versus a wall. But roof panels on a wall, no problem. Wall panels on a roof, typically a big problem. Here's another one of my kind of favorite pictures here. There's a couple things I want to kind of point out is this thing has metal all over it, right? The dark bronze or dark brown that you see there is just a 12-inch wide flush panel running vertically. You can see some horizontal lines in there, right? We don't want, or it's really hard to make a panel extend all the way from the bottom to the top. So at each level there, you can see we put a trim piece in there to break up the metal, but obviously kind of make sure it looks like it's supposed to be there. Then the white or the off-white you see there running horizontally is also a metal wall panel there, just to kind of break things up, not only vertically but and horizontally, but different colors. And then the orange or the copper color is more what we would call a aluminum composite or ACM type material. What I really like about here, and I always really like to point out, is right, the metals we're using are light gauge metal, right? 032, 040, 24 gauge, 22 gauge, right? So as they are very durable, they don't lend themselves to, let's say, so on the bottom here, right, where they went with the traditional kind of brick um, siding, if you will, and they didn't start the metal till all the way up, right? To me, in my opinion, that way, none of the humans, right, are able to interact with it, touch it, dent it, scratch it, right? Your landscapers or whoever, and kind of drive around on the bottom side, right? You have a very durable brick to use, and then they use the metal above that where it's a little bit more out of the way of your normal day-to-day operations. The thing with metal too is very low maintenance, right? If you're ever to have to clean this, you really don't even have to use any abrasive chemicals or anything like that. It's really just kind of a rinse and wipe down type of application. Some people even tout it as graffiti proof because you can pretty much clean anything off of it. Some faster installation time, right? This can be very true, especially if you go back to uh, that slide before this, where right with the brick, you're installing one brick at a time, where those metal panels are 12-inch wide by, let's just say, 12-foot long. Right, you're installing 12 square feet at one time. The trims and stuff like that is where some of the time kind of comes in. Being able to cover that wall or that roof with the panels can save you quite a bit of time on the install. It's also very lightweight material, right? When let's just pick on tile for a minute, right? If you had a shingle roof and you wanted to go tile, typically that decking and those trusses aren't rated for that much weight. When you're trying to switch from another material to metal, again, metal is pretty lightweight, so it's easy to do that. Most materials are actually heavier than metal. To give you a little bit of an example, 24 gauge metal is right about a pound a square foot. And then the equivalent in aluminum, 032 aluminum, is about a half a pound per square foot. So just an example there of the weight that we're talking about. The aesthetics, right? So this building here is actually a retrofit um, where it was just your basic block square building. This new tenant moved in and wanted to make it stand out maybe from some of the buildings around it, right? So they're able to use some light gauge framing on the upper part of this building. You got a little bit of an angle there, and then they were able to install these single skin metal panels over the top of it. I really like where all this equipment is, right? They didn't really want people walking by and seeing all this equipment. Um, but they also needed some airflow to go through. So they used a perforated panel to let the airflow, maybe even some natural light come through there, and then they just mix it up with some of their colors that they have in their logo, right? They have the gray and the blue. You can see on the left-hand side of the page there, or the picture, the dark blue over the entrance, again, would be more of your aluminum composite type material, but just kind of a pretty easy way to make your building stand out when you have just kind of a regular box type building. Here's another one out west, which I thought was kind of a cool way to use some of these panels, right? That soffit, if you will, at an angle. There's just your typical kind of 12-inch wide flush panel. They use some ribbed panels on the walls there. The dividers in between the residences there. Um, and then actually that wood grain come across horizontally, not on the gate that you see there, but on the upper area there is also a metal wall panel with that wood grain paint finish on it. Here's another one where, I kind of envision this building. If this were all just one solid color, right? You probably drive by and say, nice looking building. Okay. But they were really able to take just a regular, again, this is another one where it's just a 12-inch wide flush panel. They used about four different standard colors and kind of mix and match them to kind of really make this building stand out from some of the buildings around it. I thought it was just a very economical, easy way to enhance the aesthetics of this building. A couple more just options here on the roof side of things. Again, the upper picture there where you see, I think originally these were just kind of square buildings. They're able to do the roof line at an angle there. This is what I would call like an internal valley, right? It also pitches that valley towards the eave, if you will, to help funnel that water off. And then, of course, the picture below it is an internal gutter system, right? So you don't actually see the gutter on the exterior of the building. It's within the building. They have the downspouts that go in the building and probably funnel out under the grounds there somehow. But just a couple more examples. Different colors, different ways of doing things. So some of the primary factors for metal roofing specifications, right? In my world, we kind of go back and forth with should the panels be factory formed or should they be formed on site? Um, some people would say, obviously in a factory you can kind of control. It's a controlled environment, right? The machines that we're using are big $1 million machines. They bend the metal very gradually. So those are all the pros. There are a few cons to fabricating in a factory. One of them is shown in the picture here is you have to block and band these things. You have to put them on a truck, right? There's some vibration going down the road. Could potentially cause some minor scratching in the panels. Obviously, there's some cost involved there, right? With block and banding these and transporting them to the job site. And then, you're limited as well on the length of panels, right? A standard flatbed tractor trailer is 48 feet. You can get extended loads, right? This says up to 40 or 64 feet. But I can tell you those trucks are very expensive. They're a little bit limited on when they can go down the road because they are so long. Special permitting. So just some added costs there. When do we really like to form panels on site? Especially when you have longer panels, right? Let's pick on the roof side of things and just, I've done I'm doing one right now where the panels are 190 foot long, right? I'd never be able to fit that on a truck. I would never be able to roll that in a factory and get that to the job site. So what we're doing there is we're actually just taking the flat material, it's in coil form, shipping it to the job site and having a well-known fabricator fabricate those panels on site and basically roll them right onto the roof surface. That way they're not being blocked and banded. You don't have any of that cost, right? You have a little bit of freight cost, but think about trying to get a coil, right, to a job site versus preformed panels. The freight is a fraction of the cost of shipping preformed panels. And then just the capability, right, of being able to roll form on site. What you need to be careful of when you are going to roll form on site, for whatever reason that is just making sure who is going to be the manufacturer, right? When I'm shipping coil to a job site, that installer, or maybe it's a sheet metal shop, is becoming the manufacturer, right? It's still backed up by the manufacturer that you're using. You still get the same paint warranties, same maybe weather tightness warranties, but they are actually going to be the manufacturer of that metal roofing panel. So you just want to make sure you're working with the best of the best. I call them chucking a truck, right? These guys can go out and buy a used machine for probably about 50 grand. And they're off and roll forming and being your manufacturer at that point. We try to police it and working with them as best as possible. But again, you gotta remember they are the manufacturer at that point. So just be careful who you're working with, right? They want to be a good established roll forming company that's been doing it for a while. There's some of the different profiles on the metal roofing side of things. Your main ones, as you see here, are snap seam, what we call mechanically seamed, and then a cap seam. So the top left is your mechanical seam type panel. Your top right picture is your what we would call a snap seam, and then the bottom picture is what we would call a cap seam. The bottom picture there is almost become obsolete. That panel, whether it's a great panel and does very well in certain spaces, it doesn't get very good uplift pressures. So here in Florida, it's almost become obsolete. There's a few areas, probably in Orlando and in Lakeland, or maybe the northern part of the state where you could still use them. Where they do add a great benefit is they're very easy to curve, and I can curve them to very tight radiuses. The top left picture there, the mechanically seam panel, can also be curved, but is a little bit limited on the tightness of the radius. What you're seeing there is what I would call a first stage or a 90-degree seam. We also offer that in a 180-degree seam. So it's taking all that metal that you see there and turning it down towards the flat of the panel. Higher wind uplift pressures, 90 versus 180-degree seam. And then you have your snap seam on the right here. Once you snap it in place, it's done. There's no seaming involved. There's no mechanical seamer that you have to rent or buy. There's no labor involved with that, right? Once it's snapped in place, it's kind of good to go. And it uplift pressure wise, right? It's kind of in the middle there between the cap seam and the mechanically seamed panels. Still get some pretty high wind uplift pressures, depending on the manufacturer, of course. You always want to look at their Florida product approvals and see what kind of pressures they did achieve. But a great option there. I think that one is really good with aesthetics, right? Any residential or maybe a one-story building, a bank, something like that, in a high pitch on the roof, right? Where the roof is going to be very visible, is where I like to use those snap seams because it's a nice looking, consistent seam. When you're mechanically seaming these panels together, sometimes that seamer can get off. You have to fix it with hand seamers and can kind of booger up that panel seam, if you will. So pros and cons to everything, but some tidbits there for you. So kind of what I just said, right? You see this the profile on the top and the high roof pitch on the bottom picture. So a highly visible roof is where I kind of like to use these snap seams. Can be factory produced or produced in the field. Where you are little bit limited there with a snap seam type panel is you have a minimum slope of 2-on-12. That could vary a little bit depending on the manufacturer, right? I've seen some manufacturers out there that say 3-on-12 or greater. And then I've seen some manufacturers at 2-on-12 or greater. So just something to kind of look at there if you have some really low slope roof areas. You need to kind of really consider that and whether we want to use a snap seam or a mechanically seamed panel. Speaking of mechanically seamed panels here, right? Designed to be able to go on some very low roof slope areas all the way down to 1/2-on-12 pitch, depending on the manufacturer, right? In their literature, what they say that it can and can't do, but most mechanically seamed panels can go down to all the way down to a 1/2-on-12 pitch. Now that doesn't work in Miami-Dade and Broward, right? They have a code requirement of 1/12 or greater. So we wouldn't be able to, it's not that the panel wouldn't perform, but their codes down there dictate that you can't install metal roofing below 1/12. So just some considerations there to think about when you're specifying what is the roof pitch, and then of course what is the pressures of the building to see what profile we want to use. Cap seam, I kind of talked about this earlier, how it's become kind of obsolete here in Florida. The bottom picture here is what I really like to show, though. That tighter radius there is really where this panel does well. The shorter the seam, typically the tighter the radius you can go. I touched on it earlier with the mechanically seamed panels can also be curved, but are a little bit more limited on the radius there that they're able to be curved. Anytime we're curving panels like this, we want to be continuous from eave to eave. We do not want to break it up there at the ridge, or I'm sorry, at the apex of the roof, if you will. Think about that apex, the top of the roof there. It's really kind of a very low slope, a very flat area. So we don't want to put a ridge cap in there or any type of detail in there for potential leak issues. So we talked about this a little bit already, the different pitches of the roof. You can see this is a pretty low pitch here where we use the mechanically seamed panel. Mechanically seamed panels can be anywhere from 2 inch, 2.5, 3 inch. I've even seen 1.5 inch mechanically seamed panels out there. Typically used more on the commercial side of things. Again, the aesthetics of a mechanically seamed panel aren't as good as the snap lock type panels. Certain times, especially when you're using aluminum, you can get what we call clip read through, right? Where we've probably all seen or driven by a building where you kind of see almost like a little dent, consistently all the way through the panel on the seam. That's actually the clip reading through the aluminum. Aluminum's a little softer, so you get a little bit of clip read through, which it's performing, doesn't affect the performance, but sure does affect the aesthetics. So when you have a low pitch like this and nobody's going to see the roof, mechanically seamed panels are fine. And actually, the entrance here, or the higher pitch roof here in the middle of this building, is actually a snap lock type panel. So most people would look at this building and think it's all the same panel, and actually we used a mechanically seamed panel on the big portion, and then that entrance we actually used the snap lock type panel so that the aesthetics would be better for that visible roof. So kind of going back into the paint systems, right? This is kind of pretty basic stuff, but light colored roofs are going to reflect more of the heat away, and the darker colors are going to absorb more. Again, I give a big shout out to the paint coating manufacturers that even on the dark color, if you look on the color charts, right, it will show you the reflectivity and the emissivity and the SRI value. Some of the darker colors used in the black are really dark browns. We're on the negative side of reflecting these days because of some of the technology and the ceramic flakes they're able to put into the paint. There's still a very a low value there, but the dark colors still are on the positive side. They are reflecting some, just obviously not as much as the lighter colors there. Kind of a redo of that picture we showed you earlier with that internal valley, right? Still pitching towards the eave, but not as much runoff here around the edge of the building. Just a kind of a neat way to make your building stand out on this one. I really like this. Yeah, this is just your typical parking garage, right? How do you enhance the aesthetics of a parking garage? I like what they did here. Some basic light gauge framing, and then they took a perforated panel and put it on top of there, right? A perforated panel will let air flow through it. It'll allow natural light to flow through it, but really just kind of stepped up the aesthetics of this parking garage here in a very economical and easy way. Perforated panels, I do have to mention that we only perforate in aluminum. We never want to perforate steel because steel will rust over time and relatively quickly. And if you think about it, when you perforate that metal, you're putting a ton of raw cuts into that steel, and it will especially in this Florida environment, right, or rust fairly quickly, where aluminum won't do that. Cool roofs, right? This used to be kind of the Energy Star. Energy Star's kind of gone away, and cool roofs is its replacement. You'll see on most manufacturers color charts. Again, you flip to the back of it and it'll show you reflectivity, emissivity, SRI values, and they'll show you which colors qualify to be cool roof colors. Obviously, the lighter colors are always going to be on there, but even some of the darker colors will are acceptable to cool roof. Touching base again, kind of on curving panels, right? Um, a great way to this is, this building was pretty basic, and then they, kind of enhance it with this entrance, and then these big long curved roof panels. Just and even above, in front of the entrance down below, we have some curved roofs down there. The tan section here on this middle part of the building are also metal wall panels there. They're just using some different colors to give some good contrast. Next few pictures, a lot of examples here, different ways of curving roofs. The bottom right hand picture is actually here in Florida. That's Stetson College, and they're I don't even know what you call it, but that's where they store all their rowboats and all that kind of stuff. I was fortunate enough to work on that job. So kind of a traditional kind of, curved roof there. The picture on the bottom left here, right? Much steeper pitch to the roof and everything, where we're able to actually use a ridge cap at the top, right? It's not a flat area there. And obviously those panels would never conform to that all the way. So curved, but then also using a ridge cap. And then the top picture there is really the curve is going the other way, right? So where the panels are able to kind of conform to a slight radius as they're installed, but then it's also pitched towards the section that's closer to you in the picture and drain off the roof that way. So bottom right-hand picture, I always like to mention. So I talked about this earlier. You want the panel to be continuous from eave to eave. Well, you still have expansion and contraction, and how do we control that, right? So what we actually did on this job and do on a lot of these curved jobs like this is we use fixed clips in the apex of the roof, right, to actually kind of pin and hold the panel, keep it from expanding, contracting at the apex or the center point of that roof. And then we use expansion clips throughout the rest of the roof panel. So they were actually pinning it in the middle and then forcing that expansion to go in two directions towards the eave like we want it to do. A couple more examples here, some curved roofs here. We're seeing this a lot on, your train and your bus stations. I see it a lot. The right left-hand picture there is another curved roof area. You got some aluminum composite. You have column covers. The upper section there, the white panels, again, are just some vertically run flush panels type panels. So a lot of metal on this one and curved as well. Structural considerations for curved roofing. Um, this is where we really want to get the engineer of record involved. Curved roofs, flat roofs, or pitched roofs that are flat panels. A structural panel needs to be tested as a structural panel. Typically, what that means is that it is able to span open framing, right? It doesn't need a plywood deck. It doesn't need a metal deck underneath it. But that can only be achieved in certain areas where wind pressures are really high. We kind of need that plywood or metal decking underneath it to make it work. This kind of talks a little bit about fixed clips in the apex of the roof, which I already kind of covered. And then here's where a couple of the what not to do type of things or what you can expect. The left-hand picture here is what I was talking about with a little bit of clip read through. You can see at the top of this panel where you always have to start with hand seamers and then you install that electrical seamer onto the seam and it will seam the rest of it. You can kind of look through this and see that those kind of minor dents where you're seeing the clip in the panel. Again, performance wise, this roof is fine. But aesthetically, you know, if this was a 6-on-12 pitch and very visible, I probably wouldn't want to use that mechanically seamed panel. Picture of the far right here is where, you know, you have a vent stack of some sort coming through the roof, and they went right through the standing seam, right? So standing seam panels do not leak. Details leak, right? Valleys, hips, rakes, pipe penetrations, right? And if we go right through the seam, we're kind of defeating the purpose of standing seam. That you can see to the left of there, a smaller pipe penetration still should be, you know, that pipe should be centered in the middle of the panel, but a pretty basic way of putting a boot around it to flash it. But a small penetration, right? The larger penetration there, where if you were to put that right in the middle of the panel, it would just dam up the panel, right? It wouldn't let the water flow or debris flow around it. So what do we do there? We can actually build a square box, what we call a curb, and then flash that curb properly, have the pipe coming through the flat of that box, and then using that orange boot. The reason it's orange on that boot is because it's a high temperature boot. There's some type of heat coming through this pipe, but that really needs a curb. The middle picture here is kind of a pet peeve of mine. These are, as you can see, not very long panels, but this is a light gauge aluminum panel with no stiffening beads, striations, pencil ribs, flat ribs, whatever you want to call them in the flat of the panel. This has none of that. This is just a smooth panel in aluminum, fairly wide panel. And what you're seeing there is what we call oil canning, right? So that panel is trying to expand and contract throughout the day. Well, that expansion contraction goes to the least path of resistance. And if you don't have any stiffening beads or striations in the flat of the panel, it's going to bubble up in the middle of the panel first. And then eventually that panel will expand towards the eave and will kind of pop loose and will flatten back out. But certain times of the day, especially the middle of the day when we're heating up or even cooling down, is when you're going to see this oil canning. So I highly recommend using something in the flat of that panel, whether it be striations are kind of the best, pencil ribs, flat ribs, stiffening beads are kind of next best, and then, you know, smooth panels. Not all smooth panels will do this, but it's much more likely in a smooth panel, especially in aluminum, right? Aluminum expands and contracts twice as much as steel does. There's just a lot more movement there. This is a copper roof. All of it is copper roof, even the dome there. But just kind of showing the capabilities, right? Obviously flat panels and standing seam, but not only curved panels on that dome, but actually tapered panels as well. Now, what I always talk about when I talk about copper roof systems is this is what it's going to look like for probably 20, 30 years. Everybody thinks copper and they want that green patina look to it. Well, it starts out nice gold shiny copper, and within a couple weeks it turns into a dark bronze like this through its weathering pattern, and then eventually down the road it will turn into that green patina. So obviously copper is very expensive, so you have to have the right client for that. But then also make sure you meet their expectations and let them know that you're going to have a brown roof for quite some time. There are ways to speed that process up a little bit, but I don't want to get bogged down with that. Here's an example of where, you know, some people think copper, they like that nice shiny gold copper look. This is a painted product here to try to mimic that. So with some of these different paint colors, we have patina green, or it'd be a solid green to kind of mimic that patina look. But here's where a shiny copper kind of look. The benefits, you know, water drainage systems, including gutters, downspouts, scuppers, both enhance performance and complementary building aesthetics. Kind of talked about this, right? All the different colors, the different profiles that we have to choose from now is really benefited us. This is just some examples of some different gutter systems, right? The top picture is more of a typical box gutter. And then the bottom picture is what we call a half round gutter system. All different kinds of colors. You can match the roof, or you can use it as a contrast and do a different color. I always say that the gutters should always be aluminum, right? They are holding a little bit of water all day, every day, especially here in Florida, right? There's always some moisture in there. Steel rust, folks, aluminum doesn't. So even if you have a steel roof, I want you to use aluminum gutters so that they will last a long time. Just some different examples of this is a closed downspout. Don't forget about the soffit, right? We can use a lot of metal on the soffit as well. You can see some of the different profiles here where the top picture and the left picture are what we would call a V-groove type soffit. Can be solid, could be half vented, could be fully vented. The picture on the bottom right is more what we would call flush panel. Can have a wide vent, can have a narrow vent. But anytime we are ventilating or perforating metal, again, we want to use aluminum. Here's some really cool pictures. I always really enjoy these ones because, again, just a very basic flush panel here, but then they're able to use some different colors to really make this thing stand out. Again, you can see the horizontal breaks there to break up the panels, right? We don't want them continuous all the way from the bottom all the way to the top. Different reasons, oil canning reasons, easier to handle short panels. So we made some horizontal lines there, kind of lined up with the different floor levels here. And then this is where they did get into a little bit of custom paint colors. That yellow, it would be, I don't know too many manufacturers who stock and have that as a standard color, but the greens, the two shades of green and the gray are all just standard colors. But just a really neat way to kind of enhance the building and aesthetics. The metal wall panels, we have ribbed. We've talked a lot about the flush and reveal, and then we have tiles, more of a stamped process. Ribbed panels, right? Wall panel industry has done a lot, the same as the metal roofing industry has done, where all of our roof panels 50 years ago were exposed fastener panels, right? You saw all the screws, maybe a little rubber washer there to try to help protect that hole in the roof. And then we went to standing seam, right? No exposed fasteners. Well, metal wall panels have kind of done the same thing on the ribbed and the flush panels where no more exposed fasteners. On the ribbed panels, the industry really has a lot of different profiles now. It used to be one or two. Now most manufacturers are up to a dozen different profiles for you to choose from on those ribbed panels. Some more ribbed, some less ribbed, more flat areas. We just like to show you this building twice because it's so cool looking. Obviously here up in Cincinnati, Ohio, but just a cool looking building in my opinion. Another example, right, of how these are more ribbed panels. Pretty basic box building here. How do we make it stand out? They're able to use some different colors, mix and match some colors there. The orange you see is more of the aluminum composite type material. That solid black ring you see there around the entrance is also ACM or aluminum composite type material. So again, pretty basic looking building, but we're able to kind of promote the aesthetics with some different coloring. Here's some examples of your exposed fastener panels, right? These are used on roofs and walls. Kind of the old way of doing it. The top picture is just what we would call multi-rib. Middle picture is a 7.2 panel, and the bottom right there is what most people would call an R panel. Again, great panel, can be very strong and durable, will last a very long time, but there are maintenance involved with the fasteners, right? Those fasteners with the expanded contraction of metal will tend to want to back out. So you have maintenance there. You have to tighten them up. You have to replace them after a while. So if but these panels are much more economical, right? We're covering 3 foot by however long you need them at one time, and can be very strong. We just need to make sure the building owner knows that there's some maintenance involved there. So again, conceal fasteners, that 12-inch wide flush panel can also, be different widths here, but gives you that nice flush look. Where we use this a lot is where maybe the building owner can't afford that aluminum composite type material. And this is what we would call single skin, right? There's no composite on the back side of it. And that's why, but we're also a little bit more limited, right? With the area of flat that we can cover, right? These are typically, the widest panel would be 12 inches wide, depending on the manufacturer. You can do more narrow ones, but this is a good alternative, right? Much more cost effective way of cladding your building without having to use aluminum composite. Perforated, just some examples here of the different patterns that are used out there. Again, we're only perforating aluminum because of the rust factor. But these perforators, just a brief example, right? We get the metal flat. We shear it down to the different widths that we need. We send it to a perforator. They put the different patterns in it. We bring it back, and then we roll form it into its end profile. But these are just some of the basic patterns that you'll see out there. These perforating manufacturers can do some pretty cool stuff. We touch a little bit on composite panels, right? Here's an example of a wet system and a dry system. Pros and cons, right? The wet system is your top picture. So what that is the joints there are all high quality sealant or caulking. The con there, right, is having to maintenance that caulking or that sealant. And then the bottom picture is what we call a dry system. It actually sounds weird, but it lets the water into the system, but has ways to drain it out below. But as you can see in the red portion here, we can do some very large areas and keep it very flat and smooth because that metal has a piece of composite on the back side of it to keep the stiffness. Wood grains. Touched on this earlier. Again, big shout out to the paint manufacturers out there for being able to do this kind of stuff with the Kynar systems. Seeing a lot of this on the soffit side of things, right? You want that wood look to the soffit, but obviously real wood, you have to stain it, you have to paint it, you have to maintenance it. This is where you can get that wood look. To the layman, they look up and they think it's wood. You and I may be able to tell it's not, but will last a very long time, very low maintenance, and gives you the look that you want. I briefly talked about some of these natural colors, right? The coppers, the zincs. These are actually Kynar painted systems, but to mimic that look of a shiny copper or more of an ore type zinc type finish. But this is all, again, painted system, paint finish warranties, all that good stuff. Much more economical, right, than copper and zinc as well. So the conclusion, we talked about a lot of stuff, all the different profiles. I barely even scratched the surface on the capabilities there on different profiles. The colors is kind of really where it's at, the different options there. Again, went from probably a dozen to 2 dozen standard colors now. Most manufacturers up to 40, 50 different standard stocked colors out there. But we can also mix and match different colors as well. Again, you need some quantity to do that, and you need some longer lead times because we have to get that painted specific to the color that you're looking for. So that's it for me. Here's my contact info if you'd like to reach out and have any more questions. I'm up against the time. Looks like I have about 5 minutes left. So let's see.
Hey, Royal, I don't know if you can see the questions, but you have about 15. If you want to try to get to those, and then if not, if we run out of time, you could still go backstage and answer them by typing them in. But you do have about 5 minutes if you want to check them out.
Yeah, let's dig into some of those questions here. Should receiving physical samples of metal to choose colors be difficult to receive from manufacturers? No, should not be very difficult. We're used to that, right? We're used to getting those inquiries. Most manufacturers have those readily available and should be able to ship them out pretty quickly. Are there NOAs for metal panels? Great question. So there are some some approvals out there that there are some systems out there that have NOAs. On the wall panel side of things, it's a little bit different, right? Where typically we're going over, either a block wall or even a plywood wall, right? So that block wall, that plywood wall is really taking the place of what you need for an NOA. The main factor there is impact resistance, right? So the metal panel doesn't need to be, metal wall panel doesn't need to be impact resistant, but the system does. So if the system is, let's just pick on a block wall. Block wall, we would put hat channels over the block wall and attach the metal siding panels to that. So in that case, you don't really need the NOA. And a lot of manufacturers, if you go on Miami-Dade's website, don't have NOAs on the wall panel side of things because of that, right? So what we do in that case is we use our Florida Proctor approval, and then we get site-specific engineering. So all we're really trying to do is prove that the panels aren't going to come off of the building and become projectiles, right? So most manufacturers do not actually have NOAs for their metal wall panels. So good question there. I can elaborate a little bit more on that later if you need. Our panel are all or most configurations available when roll formed. Yeah, so most of us manufacturers, right, we don't stock the profiles, right? We stock the metal, the flat metal, and we make everything to order. So you have to imagine these rolls of metal. They're 4-foot wide rolls by 45,000 pounds. So we spin that off, make the coils more narrow to whatever profile we're making, and then we roll form them into the exact length that you need. Obviously, we have some minimums and we have some maximums, but we can roll form them to the length that's needed. What is recommended for attaching solar panels to the standing seam roof? That's another great question. There's a system out there. It's called S as in Sam -5. They're these aluminum blocks is what they are, and they fit over the standing seam, and they actually kind of bolt to it without penetrating the seam. Now that aluminum block has areas where you can put bolts on the sides, on the top, wherever you need to, and then the solar guys will attach their angles to that, and then have their racking system for the solar, which to me is a great system. No penetrations in that metal roof, right? No roofer wants any type of penetration, especially in metal, right? Because it's so much harder to repair if you do have a leak. So that S5 clamp is great, and it's used quite a bit, especially on the solar side of things. Wendy, looks like I am out of time here. 11:20. I'll go backstage and type in some answers for these questions so everybody can see them. And yeah, you have my contact info if you need anything else.